These companies investing trillions of dollars in CapEx.
Trillions of dollars in the race to build artificial intelligence support systems.
Trillions of dollars of our tech companies investing in building data centers in America.
How far AI will take us, and how fast, may depend in part on a basic choice about the overall approach to sharing or withholding information, a choice often mentioned in passing, but one that investors may not have identified as key.
I want to see AI everywhere. You know, we were so early in the real usage of the technology.
Lisa Su is chair and CEO of AMD, the chip maker with hundreds of billions of dollars at stake in the development of AI. When it comes to the software that runs on their products, she and her company have made their choice in favor of open source technology, sharing where they can.
The difference with open source or open standards is the idea that you set out a set of standards that people can follow, and then different companies can choose to implement in a different way. And the whole idea is to provide platforms that the entire ecosystem, lots and lots of developers can develop, and that you can be able to interchange sort of the best of breed from different sources.
Why is there so much passion around open? I mean, is it a matter of business or is it a matter of philosophy?
The philosophy is, do you believe that there's any one company or any one group that will have all of the best ideas in the world? Or do you believe that if you have an open ecosystem where different researchers and different groups can contribute, that you will end up with a better product overall? And philosophically, I think, from an AMD standpoint, actually, if I think about, throughout my career, I look at, sort of the different inflection points on technology. Things often start, new ideas often start in a closed environment. But when you actually think about when they get big and when, a lot of people adopt, you like to be in an open environment. And, that's philosophically. Now let's talk about the business aspects of it. The business aspects of it are, we all have to make choices of where we invest. And do you want to trust, all of your crown jewels and all of your data in a closed ecosystem that, may or may not be the most competitive at any given time, or, may have, a flaw or any of those things. Whereas, in an open ecosystem, you have choices. You can decide who is the best at any given time. You can decide, if I have my data in a cloud environment, I can easily move it to another environment. If I have my applications that are built on one chip, if there's a better chip, a few years later, you can move, quickly. That's kind of the idea of both.
What, broadly speaking, are the advantages of open? And let me throw one out. For example, in a new technology, is it more likely, all other things being equal, that the technology will develop more quickly if it's open?
I would say that the main advantage of an open ecosystem is that you can get many, many more developers on that ecosystem, and they will contribute, sort of in their, special way. So, an example I can give you is, when we think about supercomputing, like the largest supercomputers in the world, we usually like to develop them on open software stacks so that researchers from all different labs can actually contribute to those applications and those learnings. We see that a lot in open ecosystems, which is the notion that we want more developers. Like Linux is a great example, right? Linux is one of the examples where with a open operating system, you can see that it's now really become, the standard for a lot of computing going forward.
For all the advantages of the open source approach to AI, many of the most important players, including most recently Meta, with a new model expected to debut next year, have gone the other way, keeping much of their generative AI tech proprietary. And there are some advantages to that approach, including preventing bad actors from having access to source code that they can manipulate. That's something Sue believes can be remedied by community policing.
I think there is a definite view that there's a place for open and then there's a place for proprietary. And when I say that, I mean, look, there are amazing groups of researchers that are working on the largest foundational models. When you think about what's happening at OpenAI and what's happening at Google and what's happening at Anthropic, what's happening at Meta, these are phenomenal labs that are doing a tremendous research in AI. There are also a number of open models. OpenAI has an open model. Meta, their Llama series have had open models. And what you find when those models are open is there are more researchers that are able to build on top of that. And I think there's significant advantages there. So, our thought process in how this evolves over time is you're going to have both in the ecosystem. And just like my very early example of sort of the Apple iOS ecosystem and the Google Android ecosystem, it's not like you're going to have all of one take over, all of the other take over. But what you do see is there's value and richness in having, let's call it, a little bit of competition between the ecosystems. And most importantly, what we want is what's best for the consumer is to get the best overall product experience and the best overall capabilities. And you do that when you allow a playing field that allows good competition across the board.
The debate between open source and proprietary is not a new one.
This IBM 705.
The computer industry had to confront a similar choice long before the current rush to artificial intelligence models. Sam Palmisano was the CEO of IBM from 2003 through 2011.
How this whole thing began was basically in the late 90s. And there were two different models. There were proprietary models that existed, IBM in the mainframe, Microsoft with client server, et cetera. They were all proprietary. And we believed at IBM that a better model was one that would drive more innovation, more growth, if it was open source so everybody could participate. So that led to this Linux initiative, which was the open source institute that was created by the industry, which we were part of. And obviously what happened over time, now we put a lot behind it. We made $1 billion bet that Linux would become commercial and that in the future, Linux and Apache would be kind of the operating environment of the internet. Well, it worked out, but it could have been a mistake, but it worked out. So that gave it a lot of momentum. But the whole point was open innovation is going to win over single company proprietary approaches because they have a limited amount of resource and a limited market. Even if they have a large share position, it's still a smaller market than the entire industry.
When you made the decision to go open source with Linux, was there controversy about it? I mean, what were the pluses and the minuses of that decision?
Huge internal debate. Think of all the stuff IBM invented over the history of the industry. It was all proprietary. Whether that was not just in mainframe or storage and database and all those things were all invented by IBM. So there's the camp that said, hey, you guys, this is crazy. We have this proprietary model. It's very profitable. Slower growth, but it's very profitable. And it's, from a business perspective, the alternative was that, no, if we can open up the opportunity and then participate in a bigger opportunity than the one we're participating in, IBM will be better off long term. And that was the decision.
The IBM move to open source for operating systems 25 years ago helped spur what became a software revolution as firms adopted the system and built their own proprietary applications on top of it. Looking back on it now, it's hard not to conclude that it was good for the business overall and, ultimately, good for companies like IBM. But is history likely to repeat itself this time as the world experiments with various generative AI approaches?
The chip is actually quite small. We want to present a framework where we're going to get the best ideas coming out of this. And from an AMD standpoint, we'd love you to run on our chips, but more importantly, we want you to run on an open ecosystem so you can decide, 2 years from now or 4 years from now, if you made a choice of AMD, that doesn't mean you're locked into our chips for the next 5 years. It means that you have an open ecosystem where you can benefit from all of the competitive capabilities that come on board over the next 5 to 10 years.
Which sounds like it should be good for the business long term, overall the business. Is it also good for AMD in the sense that in that world where you can switch and you don't have to be committed, you'll sell more chips over the long term?
I believe we will because we are giving people the opportunity to choose. And look, we always have to be best in class, right? There's no question that there's so many innovations to come on board. But the idea that if you develop on AMD, you have choice and you also have the ability to work closely with us in terms of how we develop this ecosystem together, that this is a case where 1 + 1 is going to be greater than 3 because we're getting the smartest people from all of the ecosystem versus just we're going to figure out everything on our own.
And it's not just the big U.S. tech companies making their bets on open versus proprietary. China is casting its vote as well, and perhaps ironically, siding with the open approach.
Where we started, it was mostly proprietary, and the winners at that point in time were Meta, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, et cetera. They were the winners, and we're growing like crazy with these large language models. Then all of a sudden, this thing happens in China. And there's two things that happen in China that are open sourced, and they're based on this view that innovation will scale faster if we have an open source approach. DeepSeek, which got a lot of press, a lot of coverage. The other one's called Hugging Face, which you hardly hear about. But if you look at the numbers compared to the growth before 2024, it was heavily dominated by the three companies, the hyperscalers I talked about. And then since then, it's been these other companies and the China approach. So since 2024, China actually is outgrowing the proprietary models, but it's the open source innovation. And they've gone from nothing to millions of people now using these capabilities.
To your point, Sam,
right.
There's this chart that we were provided actually by your folks out at Stanford,
right.
Which actually illustrates the competitive nature of the large language models in China versus the United States over time.
Correct. You look at it, the point I was making, up until 2024, it was clearly a blue curve led by the United States, the companies, but led by the United States. It flipped in 2024, and China went vertical. And it's almost caught up to the United States now. This thing is rocketing.
As happens so often, it ultimately comes down to business, albeit business with profound ramifications well beyond the specific companies involved. AMD's Sue has little doubt that what works best for AI development overall will also be the best way forward for her company.
The ability to collaborate actually helps us go faster, because you only have to differentiate on the things that are, let's call it, the most secret sauce. And if we can come up with standards so that we're not doing the same work multiple times at different companies, that's actually a good thing.
And the secret sauce for you is in the chip.
Yes. The secret sauce is in the chip. It's in how we marry the chip to what will eventually be the application. And in our world, David, what I find the most interesting is the idea that every application that we see going forward, every device that you see is going to have AI as part of its essential element. And we want to be as much as we can the provider of that essential AI capability from the hardware side. We've seen sort of the advent of ChatGPT now turn into, is there a AI bubble? And I say that we're just starting to see the real utility of AI. Yes, the investments are high, but why are we all so confident that there's a payoff at the end? The way AI has been improving over the last, let's call it couple of years, has been faster than any other technology that I've seen. The adoption rates have been faster than any other technology. The potential is faster than any other technology. But what I'm here to tell you is that it's nowhere near its peak capability.